Welcome back. My name is Matt Reiners, and I'm the co-founder of Eversound, a company dedicated to improving the quality of life for older adults by giving them the gift of hearing. Today, I'm joined by my friend Scott Smith, National Director of Resident Programming at Five Star Senior Living. Scott has a really unique background, and he's been a teacher, a director of implementation for a technology vendor, a director of education and experience for a senior living provider, and now overseeing resident programming for Five Star. I've gotten to know Scott over the past year, and he's an awesome dude. He's got one of the best beards in the industry and is legitimately the only guest that has met and held my daughter. So thanks for joining me today, Scott.
Thank you, Matt. And your daughter did not cry, so that's a bonus points for me. So that's good.
She's got a good read on character, so her EQ is really high. So we've been working on that.
Good. I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, absolutely. So Scott, you have the rare background going from the tech vendor side to the provider side, which I find is usually the opposite of what typically happens. And, I'm curious, has there been anything that you've learned going from one side to the other?
Yeah, I think a lot of that I've learned. It was really an eye-opening experience, especially that first couple of months. But to put it bluntly, I guess what I would say is, when you're on the provider side, like, your tech is not that important to us. It's just, there is so much going on the day-to-day basis. And I remember being with IN2L, the director of implementation there, and I'm reaching out to customers over and over, and, why aren't they responding, or what's going on? And, always going, this is the solution to everything. And then being on the other side going, there are so many people vying for the time of the people in the communities and at corporate. Plus the day-to-day operations, plus trying to help the communities go through all the obstacles, that at the end of the day, that phone call, that tech is just not as important as we feel it is when we're on the tech side. So I think that's a big one. And like I said, again, there's a limited amount of time. There's a lot of people trying to get that attention and that time with you. So that's the other one I did not realize. And that goes from vendors to team members to communities to other coworkers. There's just a lot of people kind of vying for a limited amount of time.
Yeah, it makes total sense too, right? I think, being on the technology side, this is what I eat, breathe, and sleep. And when I'm not getting responses, it's like, oh no, like, what's happening? Like, I need this. But and in terms of vying for time, I think too, the residents, right? Like, they require a lot of time, if not all of it, and should be a main priority and main focus for these communities. But that's a really interesting observation that I think a lot of people will understand, and it makes sense too when you say it, right?
There's just, and a lot of times it's people overuse the phrase, but there's times where it is literally life or death in a community, right? There are people passing away, and there are people that that are just struggling, and there's medical emergencies and weather emergencies and all of these things going on. And so trying to prioritize that, I didn't know that when I was on the vendor side. I really was just focused on what we did and the solutions we brought, not realizing that that was one of 1,000 problems that were happening on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good thought. And where do you think, whether on the vendor or provider side, that we're swinging and missing right now?
Yeah, I think it's so cool to see all the new tech coming out there. There's a lot of tech that's out there, really cool things that are brand new to the space, things that are just being done at a higher level. The number one thing that I see we're just missing on is just automation. The tech that comes into senior living has to make life easier in a community. And the resource that we have the least amount of is manpower and time, right? So if your tech is creating more work on the community's part, that's going to be a huge issue for us in the successful implementation. I think of things like, we really went through this phase where we heard person-centered care, person-centered care, person-centered care, which led tech companies to go, oh, I know, we'll create profiles for people. And so every tech then had profiles for people, but nobody really went through the process and going, well, how much time is this going to add to the customer or the end user's experience? And how do we automate something like that? And so when you really start looking at a building, new residents moving in, people leaving, people passing away, that roster of profiles transitions constantly. And so who owns that? And how much work goes into that? And how, as a tech provider, can you partner with somebody to help automate that for the community? What will happen in most buildings is that will fall by the wayside. The adding of new people, the deleting of older residents, and before you know it, that profile, which is a great idea in theory, really doesn't do much at the building level for us because there wasn't enough automation in the process.
It makes so much sense, right? And I think to your earlier point of like all these technologies coming out all require a certain level of dedication and time spent to use it. And if automation is not front and center, it's not an enhancement. If anything, it's a burden. And especially with time being so short, with the way that staffing is looking right now, it's from the vendor side, we should revisit and think about how do we make life easier and save time rather than creating all of this new information to fill out.
Well, it's looking at what programs is the community currently using, or what are kind of those staple programs in a building, and saying, how do we partner with them to say, a new resident moves in, so they go through the sales software, right? And then they need to go into kind of an EHR software. And then if you have a resident experience software, it needs to go through that. So instead of having to build 3-4 profiles every time a new resident moves in, how do we do that one time they all speak to each other? Is that your daughter's cup? I just wanted to, you saw the little pink sippy cup.
Daughter's wife or mine. Hey, it holds liquid. It's all good.
It's good. So that's the big thing there. And the second piece of it is, and I get this a lot, is like on-site IT support. Who owns that in a community? We don't really always know. And sometimes it falls to the maintenance director, or it's the engagement person or the ED, but a lot of tech companies are expecting a lot from the community from that side of things that we're not just equipped to handle, nor do we have we don't have the skill set sometimes or the bandwidth to do that. So that's that other piece, that swing and miss, is going like, what's that on-site IT support look like? And then, just call us and we'll take care of it. But like, how much tech skill do you need to have? Who owns that? When your tech, the lights flicker and the power goes out, what do we have to reset? Who's resetting all of that stuff? I think these are just things that from a provider side, from a tech side, we really just need to start thinking about.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because I think one thing I've noticed is a lot of tech companies like to do things in silos, and we need to talk more to develop that collaboration and again, just make life easier. And to your point of like on-site tech support, IT, I think that's such a vague term in a sense, because I've seen instances where people need help turning on an iPad, right? It's just like even simple tech, and like, what could that look like? And I remember I talked to a community that had an IT lead, and I was like, he's like, they call me the cord guy. If it has a cord, they're calling me to help with it. And like, even just like lamps and stuff, which is just, it's wild to see. And I think that's a really, really good point.
One of the things we saw with COVID, right, when I was with a different company, was family members couldn't come into the building anymore, right? And so we really had a time frame when it's like, okay, what do you do during your visit outside of just visiting and fellowship with your mom or your dad? What else are you doing? And the number one thing was like, well, I charge their devices, right? And so it became a major thing during COVID, where we had to create schedules of whose tablets and phones that we had to charge for them, because their family members had been doing that for them, and they really just weren't thinking about it. Because then, daughter or son calls and the phone's dead, and they're frantic. So little things like that. I know wearables is a big thing, but it's like, we still have to figure this out. Like, we're not at a point where our residents are comfortable with that, or that's part of their daily life. We all charge our phone every single night. We make it work. That's not something that they typically do. So that falls back on the building.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, because like even myself, right? I got to charge my phone, my watch, my headphones, and I could barely take care of myself when it comes to that. But I can't imagine, what it looks like in these communities. Yeah, that's a really good point. And now, so you look at your career, Scott, and kind of what your focus is today, and it appears one of the underlying themes of it is being technology focused, right? I think you got an awesome background and really understand technology and all facets of it. And, with you being in this programming role, how do you foresee like technology being used in programming and how that continues to evolve?
Yeah, it's really interesting when you look at tech and what tech does, like outside of senior living, just to our culture in general, right? So it does two things, and they're actually kind of opposites. One, it makes our world a lot bigger. We're able to connect with people all over the world that share similar interests and passions that we do. But at the same time, it isolates us sometimes in our own surrounding, in our own community, in our own home. You look at Netflix, and you have a big family. I have 4 kids. Like, we're all watching different shows in different rooms on different devices. And so tech has actually brought us apart a little bit, right? It's individualized that experience. So bringing it into senior living is going to be really interesting. I think what we will see is what we saw in society, is that tech in programming is going to allow us to connect to other communities where we have people who have a very similar interest. So I look at an example. You might have someone, for me, I love U.S. men's national soccer. Like, it's kind of a niche thing. I don't have a lot of people in my community around here that like it, so I'm part of an online group, but we talk about that. Now, how do we take that into senior living? And so it's looking at, as a large portfolio, how do I connect people into programming that they're participating together, but they're not in the same location? And so I think tech can do those types of things where it's like, hey, we're going to all at 2:00 Eastern time, this program is going to be happening all across the portfolio in 35 different buildings or 100 different buildings. And at the same time, it's going to allow us to personalize that engagement experience for people. So the idea being that 25 people gather in one room to listen to the exact same thing at the same time, I don't see that being a long-term strategy that's going to work. It will for big events, just like it does in our normal society. We get together for football games and the Super Bowl and for birthdays and things like that. But it's not a typical that we hang out with 30 people on a Tuesday afternoon, right, to watch a movie together. So those are the kind of things I think tech's going to change in the industry. We're not there yet. I think it's going to be 20, 30 years, but I think that's where it's going. Short term, right now, we're really trying to push tech in a generation that isn't asking for it. And so I think from a tech company's perspective is really understanding, is there a demand for what you're offering, or are you trying to create a demand? And how are you going to handle that? How do you create that demand? Because a lot of the things that are out there, they're great, but residents aren't asking for those. So we're trying to create a value proposition for them of something that they're not really asking for.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I just think back to my grandmother before she passed away, and remember her just being like blown away of audiobooks, and like had no idea. And like, it's just like a thing where she wasn't asking for it, and definitely took a learning curve to even embrace it or understand it. And I think the technology, because there's a couple of different items at play, especially in communities today, where you look at the residents who might not be asking for tech, or their tech might be learning their email, and we're all coming out with these technology solutions. But I've also experienced, from my point of view, of some of the staff kind of being hesitant to embrace tech, even sometimes tech phobic, right? It's just like scared of it. I've been to the communities where they've gotten the sheet of how to work the DVD player right next to it. And I always think back to my mom, who, when she changes the input of her TV, calls me because she needs help. Right. She doesn't know how to do it. But, I'm curious, what do you say to those teammates or those colleagues that might be a bit hesitant to embrace technology?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that it's so true. I've been on calls, trying to help people hook their computer up to an HDMI cord to their TV. And this is NASA science for some people. This is really, really difficult. And for most of us, we take that as something that we could do no problem. So there is very little consistency right now in the industry from a tech standpoint on, kind of the baseline for people. The first thing I say is, like, keep it simple. Like, what is a small thing that they can do? They can start utilizing technology. So, what are some of the things what are the problem areas they have? Because ultimately, tech should be a simple solution for a problem. And so starting with that is, so identifying some pain points that they currently have, and then working on those types of things first. There are tech that we use just because it gives us more options, more enjoyment, but the tech that's going to stick with most people is something that's going to solve an immediate problem. I think of, it's one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past with Eversound, is that it's a very simple tech. It does a really good thing, but it solves a problem for people. But it's also using hardware that they're already familiar with, which is headphones. So I think that's a big advantage for you in that space. We're not introducing new hardware to many people, right? The headphone's pretty consistent across the board for people. So that would be the other piece of it is what tech do they have, and how do we help them get more out of that? So their cell phone and iPad, things like that.
Yeah, it's a good point. I even just think back to this past weekend. I got on a Zoom call with a future partner on Sunday evening because she was having trouble tracking down a Zoom recording. And it's just like something to me or you, it's just kind of like, okay, like, second nature, we know how to figure it out. And we figured out that she was using the wrong login. So like, of course we can't find it. But I think too, I think those small wins are important. And especially like, we take a crawl, walk, run approach here where we're kind of like embracing it slowly and then letting them kind of learn at their own pace. I've also learned it'd be helpful too from our end of like teaching the why behind it. Like to your point, talking about Eversound, the hearing, right? They see that every day. They know it's a problem. And once they kind of see how that can help and they have some of those earlier experiences, it really helps with that adoption.
And for me, when I'm implementing something here, right, in a large community or large company, you're looking at how do we scale back that and really make sure we get those foundational pieces in place first and everyone understands that. Instead of trying to roll out a large program all at once, where we really say, what is that foundational piece that everyone needs to have? And let's make sure we do that first. We get full adoption on that, and then we're going to go ahead and scaffold on top of that. And so that's how we're handling that too, is just going, what are the need to know? You have to do this tech to do your job, and let's really hit that hard. And when you have that, we'll build on top of that, but we're not going to overwhelm you at first.
I love it. And then, if you can look in your crystal ball here over the next 12 months and give providers or even vendors just like 3 guiding principles, what would you say?
First one, like if you're a vendor, I look at this and say, understand your customers. And I don't mean that as in like, you have very distinct within one customer, you have multitude of groups, right? So you look at, you're trying to sell to corporate. So that would be for someone like me trying to sell that. You're then trying to sell to the community to make sure that they are utilizing it and implementing it. And then your end user a lot of times is a totally different subset, which would be our residents. And so really understanding the needs of all 3 of those is essential. So, you're not going to get, if you don't get corporate buy-in, you're not going to get the sale. But if you don't get the community buy-in, you're not going to get that implementation. And if you don't get the residents to actually use the product, then you're not going to maintain that customer. And so those 3 levels, that's the first one. Just understand the needs and the desires and the wants of those 3. And then the second one is be patient. Like, be patient with us as providers. There's so much pent up, I guess, energy, pent up thoughts and ideas that are there. For example, in senior living, we haven't been able to go into the buildings it was almost a year where people were not going into the buildings. So all this change just that we wanted to do just piled up. And so now like the gates have opened, and we have to be really careful not to overwhelm the communities. And we have to kind of slow that flow of new change down a little bit, because at the end of the day, they're exhausted, right? The people working in a building, for a lot of us, we were working remotely and from home for the last year and a half. They were going to work every single day, and they're exhausted. So be patient with them. And the third one we talked about a little bit earlier is like, if I'm in the tech space, my focus would be, I want to collaborate to automate. Like, collaborate with other tech companies to automate your product. That is the thing that we are struggling with the most. We have too many dashboards we need to log into, too many passwords we have to remember, too many profiles we have to make, all of this. And if you, as the tech world who's trying to help the senior living industry, could start to work closer together to really provide a more all-in-one solutions, or at least tech that communicates with each other, that's where you're going to see a huge shift for us.
I love it. And I feel like, I wrote it down. I think it's the first time I've ever written someone down during any of these interviews, Scott, of collaborate to automate, where I think if there's, we talk about guiding principles, but if there's something that we can actually practice and not just preach, because I think there's definitely a difference in that, especially in the tech vendor side as well, of actually doing that. And, we all promote that we make life easier, but actually doing that and trying to come together and create solutions that, aren't a burden to people like you and people like your team. Scott, this has been awesome.
Yes.
You're freaking such a good dude. I'm so happy our paths have crossed. And, you're obviously someone that gets it. So thank you so much for joining me here today.
Yeah, I mean, how many millions of people watch these videos that you make? I mean, you are kind of the guru of the senior living tech world, so I'm excited for my millions of followers to go up.
Maybe billions. We'll see.
Billions,
But
millions. We'll
yeah,
see. All right.
just be ready for everyone to try and sell you.
No, I got enough of that as it is. So I'm closed for business for a little while.